Hey, one more thing before you go. Have you ever wondered where do we come from before life? Or is there a realm beyond the physical world that influences our very existence? Today, we're exploring these questions and more that have fascinated humanity for centuries with none other than Stephen Daniel. He's an acclaimed artist, writer, and modern day explorer of the unseen. Stephen has spent decades peeling back the layers of what we know to reveal what lies beyond. In his book, Brighter Realms, he takes us on a journey into the non physical worlds, which we'll talk about, and the profound ways they shape our path to spiritual growth and enlightenment. In this episode, we're going to tackle some of the most intriguing mysteries surrounding the non physical realm. Again, we're going to explain that. Stephen will shed light on the energetic nature of the non physical world, unlocking its impact on our lives. Plus, we'll explore how intuition, creativity, and our higher selves guide us daily if we only know how to listen. So, whether you're a seeker of spiritual insight or simply curious about what exists beyond what meets the eye, you're in for a mind expanding conversation. I'm your host, Michael Herst. Welcome to One More Thing Before You Go. My guest in this episode is Stephen Daniel. He's an artist and writer recognized for his ability to articulate the intersections between physical and non physical worlds. His work, grounded in 3 decades of empirical investigation, explores the origin of intuition and creativity. As the visionary behind Brighter Realms, Stephen stands out at the forefront of exploring our place in the universe. Stephen encourages us to look beyond the single-minded focus of physical reality to the larger context of our existence in the non-physical world, which I'm excited to get into. Brighter Realms is his contribution to humanity, awakening awareness of the profound influence of the non-physical in our lives. And welcome to the show, Stephen.
Hi, Michael. Pleasure to be here.
What an amazing opportunity for us to really understand what exists beyond what we can see.
Well, I think we all have a sense that there's more than we can see when we look in a mirror. We see the physical presence, and yet we have an innate awareness that, hey, I'm more than what I see. The world is more than there appears to be. We are part of something much larger than ourselves. And our entire lives have given this sense, this awareness. And yet, what is it really? How do we relate to that? What does it really mean for us? There are many experiences that we're already having, such as intuition, insight, excuse me, creativity, the ability to see beyond ourselves with a prophetic awareness. Well, where does this come from? And what is this relationship that we're having to this intelligence, this superhuman ability to be able to see all sides of an issue? Not always. There are obstructions to this. There are interferences. It's part of the challenge of being in this environment. But how do we break through the barriers, the limits, to experience all that we're capable of being? And
It's
that is the subject that I like to talk about.
so many questions, so many answers. But I like to start at the beginning. I know you grew up in Southern California. Um, Tell me about your early life.
Yeah, my early life was, I think, very conventional. My family was very conventional, very easygoing. Are you still with me?
I am.
Great. I was raised with loving family, but they had a hard time understanding the the experiences that were taking place in my life, and so I shut down. I didn't talk about it, and I can give you this story. For many years in my teens, and going back to when I was probably 5 or 6 years old, I would have a reoccurring dream, and I would be walking along a path, and I would cross a little footbridge, and I would come to a house of screens, and there was a door there. I would take a pair of sandals off, place them to the right, and step to the left to the door. But the door represented a entry, a threshold that I could not see past. And I didn't enter the door. And over the years, this dream was awakening in me an awareness of some experiences that I really couldn't define, I really didn't understand. And eventually, one day in my teens, that door was open and I was able to enter it. And once I entered that world, I became aware of circumstances of what I had begun to define as a past life experience. And up until that point, I had really no idea what it meant. I wasn't ready to explore it. I don't think I had the maturity to explore it. But in that past life, I had been a husband, I had a wife, I had a child, and I was a soldier. And I was a soldier that would leave for long periods of time on campaigns and return to my family with a degree of trauma. And that trauma was then instilled into my life. And it was a very painful memory. And that's probably likely why I wasn't able to open that door when I was younger. But at a point in my life, once I began to see those circumstances, it still took a number of years for me to be able to go into that pain and begin to understand that it was reflecting in my current life, that I had absorbed experiences and I had participated in experiences and I had been a part of a much larger experience from another time and place that was affecting my present life. In my present life, I had a degree of anxiety. I could be sad, inexplicably sad. I could have feelings that I really didn't understand, and they held me back. I had developed a very serious dyslexic problem. I was unable to read properly. I was unable to focus in school and learn, and eventually went to another school where I began to excel in my learning because they understood the process of identifying a personality, working with a personality rather than an individual's ability. And my abilities lacked, but once they understood my personality, I could then explore learning. But this helped open me up, build my confidence. And as I began to explore this other world, this past life, I reached a stage where I really was presented with a choice. It was a decision that I had to make to uh, to explore that world, but not spend a lot of time there. There was no reason to go there and to dwell, but to make a decision about severing ties from that experience, from that past, and opening a new chapter. And I made that decision. And I was able to then open a new chapter and resolve many of the traumas, if you will, from that previous lifetime. And that opened the door to other experiences in other past lives. And I had been a soldier in quite a few past lives, and it was an occupation that I understood. And I had that ability in this life to do more soldiering, but I made other choices that took me into another direction, and I was able to kind of break the chain. And I left that behind me. I've been there, done that, and moved on to other things. But soldiering was a big part of my life for a big part of my lifetimes, and also working as a legal counsel. I was involved in the legal field as a counselor, what would be called an attorney today. And interestingly, I went to college and I began to study law, and it was the one field that I understood. I just understood law. It just was an innate feeling. I could relate to it. I did very well in my law courses, but for whatever reasons, I decided not to become an attorney, and I'm happy with that decision. Kind of been there and done that. But here I am. I've written this book that I call Brighter Realms about these experiences and many more experiences.
Well, is it when you say soldiering in this lifetime? Were you a soldier in this lifetime?
No, no, didn't become a soldier in this lifetime.
What inspired your exploration? Let me try that in English. What inspired your exploration of non-physical worlds? Because I think it's an interesting concept of the non-physical world, and yeah, I'm assuming that those personal experiences are what kind of catapulted you into a journey of exploration of the non-physical world.
Yeah, indeed they did. And there's a little more to it, of course. I didn't have only dreams of, for example, walking on this path, but I had dreams where I would be out of my body, or at least what I perceived were out of body experiences. I didn't really give it a name until I was in my 20s and I had read something about out of body experiences. But I had many, many flying dreams, and usually when I was asleep, and it could happen when I was awake as well, but lying down, relaxed, in a comfortable focus. And but there was a period of a number of years during my childhood where I would inadvertently leave my body and float around the rooms of my home or outside the street, on the street, and fly above the city lights, usually at night, sometimes in the day, but it was usually at night when I was asleep. And I was uncertain what this meant, and I felt different than other people, and I felt alone in these experiences because nobody else talked about them in my family. I had a brother and two sisters, and if I dared to bring this subject up with my mother, she would look through me like something might be wrong with me. So I got very good at hiding the secret, keeping the secret of these experiences. And then when I was about 6 or 7 years old, there was a commercial on television, and it showed a woman lying in bed, an animation of a woman lying in bed, and the covers were lifted off her, and she began to float in the room, and the walls dissolved, and she went into these beautiful environments of miraculous colors and light. And the caption read, "If you ever have dreams that you are flying," and this was narrated by a Lynn Redgrave like voice. And then she said, "If you ever have dreams that you are flying, you are not alone," meaning there are other people that experience this. And in that moment, I understood that, wow, there are other people who experience this. And the commercial ended with the letters TM, Transcendental Meditation. These were the first transcendental meditation commercials that came on to, they were advertising in the 60s and possibly the early 70s. And, they were trying to get the word out that people can learn to transcend the physical boundaries and experience essentially who they are as energetic beings, interwoven, interconnected with other worlds. And this became a fascinating and curious area for me to explore, in part because of these experiences, in great part because of these experiences, and the fact that I was not alone, that other people, and I began to believe that all people have this relative experience, that we can all experience out of body states. We can all experience moving into other realms and acquiring information. And yet, these experiences were not really defined to me in terms of how this is happening, who I am, where I come from. And that came quite a bit later in my early 30s when I began to explore different belief systems. And I had, in my 20s, been very close friends with a rabbinical, with a gentleman who, interesting, was a student of law, but he was from the Orthodox Jewish system. We became very close, perhaps best friends for a time. And my relationship with him was remarkable because we could talk about the interconnected nature of physical and spiritual realms. And I studied with a Kabbalah scholar. I lived in the Fairfax district of Los Angeles along the Borscht Belt. And what was fascinating was the idea that all of these different belief systems, whether it was Judaism or Islam or Christianity, they all derived from an origin. And I became curious, well, what is that origin? Where do these systems come from? If we go back to their inception several thousand years ago, really 1,500 years ago for the major systems, but there are other systems that go back a lot further than that. And if we go back to their origin, they all have essentially the same primary message of unification between human and spiritual worlds. And they all have the same similar value of uh, helping people, being kind to people, of being aware that there's more than meets the eye, that we all have a role in lifting each other up. And yet, over time, these systems had had tended to create a division in our societies, where people would see differences between each other because of their beliefs. And I wanted to understand why these divisions and why this fragmentation was occurring when these systems fundamentally are teaching us to be unified. And that's maybe a different subject that I approach in the book, and I'm going off in a little bit of a different direction here. But what I noticed is that there is a tendency for a theme of separation, me from you, my belief from your belief, black from white, on and on, that tends to divide us from the undivided wholeness of ourselves. And there are a certain amount of fears and anger that can play into this and exaggerate this theme and this experience in human life, human experience. And this has a effect to divide us from the undivided wholeness of ourselves, as I said, and diminish our capacity for empathy, compassion, and love. And empathy, compassion, and love are really the premise of how this universe operates. And in the non-physical, that is the experience. And there's only a separation from that experience in physical life. And here we are having this experience, and all these enormous distractions take us away from ourselves, take us away from the experience of our essence. And we form many different beliefs and belief systems that continue this theme of division and keep us from experiencing our wholeness or the ability to be present with our empathy, compassion, and love. And when we lose sight of that, we diminish our capacity for insight, intuition, and creativity. And insight, intuition, and creativity, while inherent aspects of our being, are fundamentally connected to our empathy, compassion, and love. And it's interesting because when you meet people who have done work on themselves and they are looking at the world through a lens of empathy, compassion, and love, these tend to be the most intuitive people. I would say that the most intuitive people are people who work on themselves, who pay attention to their thoughts and their beliefs, who observe themselves, their feelings and their emotions, who have discovered that feelings and emotions are there to experience and not avoid. And oftentimes, go ahead.
I'll say I agree with that. I think the voice in the back of our own minds kind of understand that there's a remarkable intelligence of higher self within each of us that we all have in common. We just have to be able to recognize it, reach out to it, and accept it.
Indeed, indeed. And in my 30s, as I studied different belief systems, I was looking for a system to be able to gain access to the hatch, to enter those other worlds and acquire information from them directly, not just through dreams or not just through out of body experiences that were taking me into other environments, to really figure out the source of this information. And I learned a method, I consider it more of a technology, to have and experience direct contacts with what I've come to know as my energetic system, that each human is a part of a larger system, an energetic system in non-physical environments. And that non-physical system, and within that system we have a higher self, and that higher self is fundamentally who we are. We are an essence, a human essence, split off from our core essence or higher self to experience different environments. And our higher self's role is to set the stage for us. As a human being in this world, this stage has been set for us to be an actor or an actress, to play our parts, to learn from, to make choices and decisions that take us on various trajectories, and to learn that fundamentally, the love that we withhold is the pain that we carry. And as we break down the barriers to our wholeness, we discover that this whole scene is about having fun. We're creating this here, we're creating this to explore and to have fun and to learn from and grow from. And yet, the great obstacles to this experience are the presence of fear and anger and the experience of our emotions that can take us away from ourselves. And learning and growth means breaking through, breaking through the boundaries, the limitations, and discovering who we are, and joining the larger community of our higher self and energetic families to the awareness and the recognition that these are the guidance system, the advisors and the guides that we can tune into through our intuition, and intuition together are a creative endeavor. The ability to access information for creative endeavor. Our lives are remarkably creative. Look at what we do, our capacity to create children, our capacity to create the world in which we live, this extraordinary landscape, and how we shape it and how we choose to live in it. And unfortunately, we also have the capacity to be the destroyers of this beautiful world that we are creating. So it can go both ways, and that is a choice and a decision. And we make that choice and that decision. I used to be a destroyer, and today I'm a creator. I think of myself as somebody who has made a commitment to making the world a better place, where I didn't have that commitment in previous lifetimes, or maybe I thought I had that commitment, but it was marred behind a belief system of struggle with my emotions, of struggle with other individuals and other groups. And I took it under my belief system that I needed to become a warrior and fight. And I hope that I don't ever have to return to that path in this lifetime, and that I can continue on this trajectory of unification and in some way bring that awareness to other people.
I think I said as an admirable path to choose and to take. We all have a choice in life, and I think intuition. You mentioned something earlier about intuition and how that also plays a part in how we perceive ourselves and what we have expectations of. I believe wholeheartedly in intuition. Sometimes, as a cop in that lifetime of my own, my intuition was my guide on a consistent basis. I learned to listen to my
Indeed.
intuition. It saved my life several times, or was able to allow me to take somebody off the street that didn't belong on the street because of my intuition. Um, through How can we as individuals overcome through the noise of all the chaos that's taking place at the moment? How can we kind of pierce that veil of that chaos in order to connect with our own intuition and find that kind of a balance within ourselves so we can recognize it, attach to it, and then start going towards the compassion and the humanity?
It's a very, very good question. And as I was saying, each of us has the capacity to see beyond ourselves with prophetic effect. And I hear this question often: how do we trust our intuition? How do we develop this intuitive ability? And the distraction of the world is that it tends to take our attention into the world, and we look to the world for answers. And so we're looking to external sources for answers, but that those answers really come from within us. And the way that I like to go about an exercise for developing intuition, in the simplest terms, it's saying that, hey, if I can know myself well, if I can learn about who I am, where I come from, and understand my relationship here, I become more intuitive. And I would apply this measure to anyone else. we may come here without these conscious connections that I've been developing, and that's okay. You, as a police officer, were able to access your intuition perhaps at a time in your life where you were unconscious of the source of this intuition. Didn't matter. My father was a doctor, and his practice was based on intuition. Fundamentally, he could look into a patient's eyes in the waiting room and have a very good idea of what was going on with them internally. And then he would use his instrumentation technology to test, reject, confirm, and of course his intuitive skill. And so one of the exercises that I talk about in my new book, Brighter Realms. And by the way, this is the first edition. I have a second edition that's coming out with the exercises. The first edition does not have the exercises. The second edition will have the exercises. And it's an exercise for tuning into our essence. So one of the logical practices is we're emotional beings. What are these emotions made of? We may have a feeling of anger, but we don't understand where the anger comes from. Well, if we explore that anger, we may discover that there's a fear somewhere behind that anger. And the anger is the way that we've learned to manage that fear. And so there are layers, within us. We're fairly complex beings. We have a vast mental, psychological, and spiritual landscape that is also attached to a physical body. And to know oneself is to explore the feelings and emotions and the drive, the motivations about how we react in this environment, our responses to this environment. So one of the things that I've done over the years is journaling. And I've written, for example, about past memories and gone into those memories where I didn't just look at the memory, but I looked at the feelings I was experiencing around that memory. And then I was able to change my awareness through that simple exercise. It didn't require going in and spending a lot of time there, but just touching on those memories links us to them. What happens in the past happens today, even though we have memories that go back to when we're 6 years old or 10 years old. Those memories are still very poignant today. They're still very much an influence in our lives, whether they're positive or negative. And by going back there and touching on them and having that experience of tuning into that feeling, we begin to take an accounting of our experiences and a record of where we've been, where we've come from, and that helps us to see where we're going. It also helps us to be more present in the moment. And it's through that present state that we can explore in all directions. And any time that we look at ourselves in this light, that we tune in to ourselves on a emotional level, a feeling level, we are tuning into the hidden layers of our inner life. That's where our essence resides. And our essence is the key to who we are in terms of the energetics of our being and how we communicate with the non-physical. Our essence is also the way we communicate with each other. You meet somebody and you have a good feeling about them, or you feel awkward, or you feel out of place, or you feel nervous in their presence, or you feel afraid. And your essence is telling you, your essence is giving you the signs to listen to your intuition. And your essence really is the link to our non-physical counterparts, our higher self, our energetic system, which is what I consider a organized, intelligent system, an association of interrelated energies in non-physical environments of which we are innately connected. We're an extension of this system. We've come into physicality to have experiences in this dense environment, which presents many, many challenges for us. So again, getting back to the basics, tuning into our essence. There are many ways that we do this, but anytime we can experience empathy, compassion, and love, that is coming from our essence. Anytime we have a moment of insight or intuition, or we're in a creative stream of thought, creativity can be the way a mother manages her children. It can be the way we drive in our car and get out of a tight spot, a parking spot, or if somebody cuts us off. The way that we manage that experience can be a creative endeavor. It can be writing a book. It can be any myriad ways that we can think of. We're all creative beings and we take creative steps every day of our lives, steps that are guided by our insight and intuition. And we are learning from these experiences to tune in unconsciously. We're already tuning in unconsciously, and we already have this capacity. So I like to write about why that is and how that happens, how that transpires. My work in the non-physical has been grounded in about 3 decades of empirical research. And throughout my life, all of these transcendental experiences were merely signs that were telling me, hey, there's more going on than meets the eye. How it's time for you at a certain stage for me to figure out what was really going on. And this led me to make a unique connection in the non-physical with what I perceived were members of my energetic family, and they began to provide specific guidance as to who I am, where I come from, why I am the way I am. And here I am, having written a book about it years later, putting it all together in a cohesive package. And this has been the journey.
I can understand that. I mean, you mentioned something earlier, if you don't mind me touching back on this, because in the beginning of the conversation, we talked about how you were dreaming that were flying, and that found this doorway, and then you went back and found in another lifetime you were a soldier, and in the trauma that all of that took place in several different lives actually, and how that trauma was brought forward to you in this life.
Correct.
What role do you think does now? I believe in intergenerational trauma as well. I've learned a lot about that in the last 2 or 3 years, where we bring our generations of trauma that's passed down to us through those generations. So, am I to understand that the same trauma, sort of like generational trauma, comes with our soul each time that we go back
Well,
into another
it's a very
lifetime?
interesting question, and I have studied this, and I do have a perspective on this. Often we look as a trauma as having a genetic imprint in our body, and certainly it does affect our genetics. I don't doubt that, but that it's a genetic predisposition. We're looking at it more from a physical point of view. I'm looking at it from an energetic point of view. And to suggest that, for example, my mother and I had past lives together, and that we had experiences and we came forward into this lifetime, and those experiences were still manifesting to some degree, although we had become very good at compartmentalizing the trauma in our inner world, and we could ignore it. We could move on with our life and have a relatively good experience
Right.
without that trauma always affecting us. So when I think of intergenerational trauma, I think of my mother and I having a past life, and that many of the people that we're surrounded with in our family, we've come with through various generations. And the experiences that we've had with these people, or for example, we may have had a mother who had no trauma, but as a result of something that happened to the child, the mother was traumatized in that lifetime and came forward with those traumas, and the relationship had changed, and now the child was the best friend or a friend of that mother, who's now a father in this current lifetime. um, yeah, I'm making it a little more complex than it should be, perhaps, but essentially, trauma is transferable between energies guided by similar values. So that, for example, I've seen animals become traumatized in this current lifetime simply by handlers feeling trauma, experiencing trauma, and conveying and transferring that trauma to the animal. I've seen this happen with people who were not traumatized. My mother, who I believe was born with certain traumas, had an experience when she was in her teens. She was 12 years old, walking through a school hallway, and two men tried to grab her. And she fought hard, broke free, and ran away. But the event left her traumatized, and for the rest of her life, she could have flashbacks, emotional flashbacks, and inexplicable fear and feelings of terror would rise inside her, and she would work to manage those feelings effectively because she was very good at that. But some people aren't as good as that, and it can become a very difficult and painful experience. And no doubt what she experienced was painful for her. And I'm not sure that she was able to resolve that trauma in this lifetime. And therefore, in her next lifetime, that trauma will be present to some degree, compartmentalized within her inner world, and it may manifest itself. I can't really speak to her evolution. I can only speak to my own. It's a really good question because it comes down to we can see what's happening around us and the experiences of others, but we can only really learn about ourselves, about what's happened to us, where we've come from, and where we're going. But getting back to the point of intergenerational trauma, yes, I think it's a very real phenomenon because we are from other places and other times and have had other experiences and many experiences that can stay with us, can stay anchored within our being. And one of the ways that I've learned to unhook myself from trauma is by taking the journey inward to explore myself. And this is the most difficult journey because it can be very painful and it can be very, very difficult to pull back the layers and look at ourselves. But when we do take that in earnest and we're honest with ourselves and we make the choice and the decision to explore ourselves, the doors will begin to open at some point. And although it can be
Yeah,
very challenging.
I agree with that. Based upon part of that, do you think? I mean, I think we all have a choice in life. Do you think we have free will, or are our choices determined by prior causes beyond our control, like we just spoke about?
Yeah, I think that we're creating this experience as we go. And certainly we have free will, but it appears a very gray area when we continue to repeat the same experiences over and over and over. So, as you're saying, that the traumas or the difficulties, the challenges that we're born with, we may tend to recreate those until we figure out how to unhook from them and how to manage our experience in a way where we can reframe our experiences. So, this is something that I talk about in the new book quite a bit, reframing our experiences. I think it's a very important inroad for understanding that we do have the ability to change our lives and change our lives through reframing how we experience the past. And to see the experiences that we're having in this environment are only a moment in time. They're a small moment in time because in the larger experience and in the non-physical, we don't have these experiences. Although when we carry the hatchet with us in physicality, we can return to the non-physical, and those environments are far more malleable and far more creative in terms of thought creates reality. So I've had experiences in the non-physical where I've crossed the path of what I perceived were ex-humans who had very difficult lives. And one of them, for example, was a very wealthy person that I knew in this lifetime and left back to the non-physical after committing suicide and created a world in the non-physical where they could keep themselves protected from all of their fears and all of their anger. And yet, when I pointed something out to this person, and my higher self had set up this meeting for me, which I was not really informed about beforehand, it just kind of transpired in a remarkable way. But when I made this connection, I shared one thought with this ex-human present, and I said that your son loved you. And suddenly I saw this being go through this change internally, and they began to recognize that the love that they had withheld while they were in their physical life was the pain they carried, and that the pain was their own, and that they were responsible for it. And it was a remarkable event. I write about it in the new book. It's a story that I kept out of the first book. This first book was really a test to see what the market was capable of or ready for. And I've discovered that the market wants more of this, so I'm going to go full on in the next version and talk about many of the things that we're discussing here. In fact, all of them.
Well, continuing with this part of the conversation, in basically us, we all as human beings want to understand what the meaning of life is. And I know some of the things that you have just spoken about it's kind of aligns some questions for me. It is in essence, is it something we create for ourselves, or is there a universal purpose for us being here? Do we come to this life from from the other side, from the non-physical? Do we come into this presence and create this ourselves, or do we have a universal purpose in being here that will contribute to what we're supposed to be doing? Is that too
Well, I
complicated?
think you answered the question. Actually, it's really both. That we come here to experience and to learn and grow. I mean, we've heard this probably from every author who's touched on this subject, and that we contribute to humanity, and that we contribute to a greater sense of wholeness, of an awareness of what we are together as a community rather than as separate parts. The illusion is this separateness: my body, your personality, my ego. And we tend to see each other as parts, as separate beings, when we really have this field of connection between us. Any scientist will tell you that molecules operate in a cohesive field, that particles are really connected to one another. We're beginning to recognize this scientifically, and yet the non-physical is still very elusive to us. What does it really mean? So we have these egos, and these egos tend to give us this unique identity. And yet, if we move past the ego, if we can put our ego aside and tune into our essence, we begin to recognize this interconnectedness and this interwoven nature of reality that really is who we are fundamentally. We are all connected to each other through a field of connection in the non-physical, and yet the experience in physicality is separation. But I think that more of us are starting to operate in a linked fashion, and we're beginning to recognize the interconnected nature of the environment in which we live, and how these connections give us an enormous purpose, an enormous awareness that extends far beyond ourselves. And it's that awareness that is so satisfying and so filled with purpose that each of us can then define how we choose to live in this world, to reframe our experience on a daily basis, really, and to discover a renewed vision of ourselves. And that's very inspirational, and it's very affirming, and it's very wonderful. And suddenly we're on this path, and we're linked arm in arm on this journey to make the world a better place. We're in a physical environment. Look, even well beyond all of the challenges that humans bring to this world, the environment is already challenging enough. It's already difficult enough. We have earthquakes, we have fires, we have changes to the earth, we have meteors. I mean, who knows what's going to come down the pipe next? But here we are creating a world that's far more difficult than it needs to be. And, my goal in this lifetime is to share the knowledge of the non-physical as we're doing here, to talk about the essence, to talk about our capacity for forging a stronger connection with ourselves, which is really who we are, with our fundamental self, our essence, our higher self. and so that we can become better creators on the stage.
Yeah, I think it's a pathway to living a better life, a good life. I think
It's a pathway to living a better life. That's really what it comes down to. The choices and decisions that we make to make life better for ourselves, make life better for the world.
I agree with that, and well done. I'm happy that you wrote this book. Let's talk about how to get this wonderful opportunity for us to live a good life.
Sure. The book is available on sales platforms, but I am advising my readership at the moment to wait for the second edition. The second edition is going to be much more inclusive of the subjects that we've spoken about today, whereas the first book was really a test run. And unfortunately, I wrote it as a test run because, maybe I have confidence issues. I mean, I'm learning as we go too, as I go too. But really, I wrote it as a test run because I wanted to see if it really would make a difference. And I think it is important that the book is out there. The new edition will be released in a couple of months. You can go to my website at brighterrealms.com. You can read about the book on Amazon or Goodreads. And so there's a lot more to come in the second edition. I've added about 11 exercises throughout the chapters. I've rewritten chapters. I've added several chapters. So it's really a whole new book that will very much distinguish itself from the first edition. The second edition is worth waiting for.
Now, I'll make sure that everything's in the show notes so they have an easy way to get in touch with you anyway, and make sure your team keeps in contact with me. So when that
Sure.
does get released, we can make some updates within this episode. So I appreciate that.
Sure.
We could talk for another 2 hours, Stephen, but I know that we both have both have more conversations. What a wonderful opportunity for us to get a good life, and I really appreciate you coming on the show. And I'm going to have to thank the people that connected us because, again, I told you I'm familiar with them. I know them, and I appreciate that we were able to have this conversation. Thank you for your experience, for sharing your wisdom, and just thank you.
Thank you, Michael. I really appreciate the opportunity.
And again, I'll have everything in the show notes just so that they have an easy way to connect with you. And this is one more thing before you go. So I ask this of everybody. Do you have any words of wisdom?
One more thing before we go. Sure. Pay attention to yourself. Learn and grow and have fun.
They're brilliant.
Know that the real learning comes from within us. And hey, it's great to read a book, right? I mean, but it's just a book. We are the book.
We are the book. As great, brilliant words of wisdom. Words of wisdom. Stephen, thank you very much again. It's a pleasure to meet you. And thank you for sharing your wisdom with us and your experience with us. And I look forward to another conversation down the road.
Me too. I look forward to it. I hope we do again.
And for everyone else out there in the community, one more thing before you go, thank you very much for being part of this community. Please like, subscribe, and share. We'll look for the show notes in regard to Stephen's book. And one more thing before you all go. Have a great day, have a great week, and thank you for being here.
Thanks for listening to this episode of One More Thing Before You Go. Check out our website at beforeyougopodcast.com. You can find us as well as subscribe to the program and rate us on your favorite podcast listening platform.